Last night, as we were talking and preparing about, or for this talk, we were remembering what it was like to be out there, sometimes hearing about other people stand up here and talk about relationships, the way that it challenged us, encouraged us, and caused lots of RDTs, so we apologize in advance. The passage that John Timon read this morning for us talks a lot about walking. And we did a little walking this summer, or hiking rather, on the Long Trail. The Long Trail is in Vermont, stretches from the southern border all the way to Canada. And there was one particular point that we want you, an image from the trail that we want you to. A place called McCullough Turnpike, where the trailhead crossed a road, and we had to find where the trail entered in on the other side. Steep road up, steep road down, trail crossing at the top. In order to find the trailhead, we went downhill about 3/4 of a mile, and basically thinking, like, where is this trail on the other side? We just felt so confused, and that's the image we want you to think of this morning, that feeling of having gone the wrong way. Because as we share our thoughts on what it looks like to practice everyday holiness within relationships, and as we've struggled with it, we keep coming back to this image, this picture of getting off track, of going the wrong way, of getting lost, and being forced to make a choice as to how to respond to that. Mm-hmm. And the reason we want you to think about this is because in relationships, holiness is not about always going the right way. That's the ideal, sure, but I think holiness and practicing it daily has just as much to do about our responses when we do sin. Do we shrug it off and continue in the wrong direction? Do we give up? Do we ask God to reroute us as we journey on toward holiness? So be thinking about that.
So today we want to share our story with you guys. We want to share what the emotional, the spiritual, the physical looked like for us. Our relationship might look different from yours, for those of you who are in relationships, and that's okay. We're not saying this is what your relationship should look like, but we are saying this is the story that God gave us. So we both grew up in Vermont. We met when we were in high school. I was just a sophomore. Cherri was a freshman. We're high school sweethearts. I was the pastor's kid. Cherri was the farmer's daughter. It was the son of a preacher man, you know.
Can you sing the song?
No. I never really dated much in high school. But one relationship I did have before I met Cherri, I had a relationship with a girl that wasn't a Christian. That didn't really matter to me at the time. But slowly, I began to realize that her standards were not the same as mine. We were not on the same paths. We're not on a trajectory toward holiness. But little did I know that Cherri was praying for me through that time.
I was. It's true, although I admit somewhat selfishly. You know, the kind of prayers like, "Dear God, please protect him from this other girl," because I liked him. But it wasn't really until March that our relationship actually began to form. It started with a phone call that was precipitated by kind of a sad circumstance in my family that I really felt the need to talk to someone about. I'd just been on the phone with another friend, couldn't get back to her, and I thought, I'll call Pete. I think he would understand. We really didn't know each other that well. I had to look up his number in the phone book. We're not that old, but we did not have cell phones. All that to say, he did answer. He listened. He prayed over the phone with me. And the next day at school,
I was nervous.
He was nervous.
I was nervous.
He later confessed that he'd never prayed on the phone with anyone, but he'd heard his dad do it. So he's like, I guess this is what I do. He was very convincing. I was convinced that he was a professional counselor. So the next day at school, he gives me a note card with a portion of Psalm 62 written on it. The next day, I gave him a note card back, thanking him for all of his encouragement. that turned into a stack of note cards for each of us about this tall. We used to pass them back and forth, and in some ways it was kind of like a spiritualized passing of notes. So we don't want to trump it up to sound oh so good, but at the same time, it really was foundational for our relationship. It put our focus, it helped encourage us to keep our focus on the Word and on the Lord, and our love for the Word really grew through that time.
So we got together a few times that summer. I invited Cherri to my parents' little cottage up in northern Vermont in the middle of the summer, and on the ride home we held hands for the first time, and it was a classic situation, all right? We're sitting in the 2 bucket seats in the van. My dog is lying down between us, and we were petting the dog, you know, and then all of a sudden we just, there's, you know. Here's the kicker, though. My mom was sitting in the back seat.
I pretended to be asleep.
But, and so then, after that moment, though, I remember calling Cherri soon after that and saying, you know, our physical, this is a part of our physical relationship. We need to talk about our standards, as crazy as that seems. And that led to a development of we wrote up a contract, and which is kind of crazy when you think about it. And but we look back on it and we're like, wow, you know, it served its purpose for that time, and it was certainly good for us. But we had sort of a progression of you know, physical standards and how we're gonna, you know, what's the progression as far as, you know, holding hands and then hugging and then kissing, and we'll talk more about that later.
So the other thing that's funny looking back, funny thinking what we were thinking when we were 15 and 16 was that we thought it would be good to have our parents sign it. So the Moultrups, my family, invited the Andersons over for dinner one night. We're all sitting around the kitchen table. I have 3 brothers who were also there. And then Pete's dad, the pastor, is like, so I hear we have something to talk about. And suddenly we're like, oh, we're getting married. Oh, my goodness. You know, it felt so serious. And it was just funny. Like, my parents are like, okay, honey, great, that's good. And my mom's like, honey, just, you know, don't kiss like your dad and I did. And Pete's parents are like, I see this happening all at once. And at one point, Pete's mom looks at us and says, can you please define what does kissing with limitations look like?
And that's when I said, Cherri?
Yeah, and I'm sitting there looking at my future mother-in-law thinking, like, I can either pretend to be 30 and act really mature right now, or I can break down and lose her respect forever. Somehow we survived. My brothers were like in the living room snickering at that point. And time went on. Our friendship grew. We did start focusing inward a bit more, worrying about what other people thought, and kind of struggling. In hindsight, we realized struggling with emotional idolatry, like putting the other person before the Lord, focusing more highly on them than on God. And the result of that was at some point in November, we had space, which... defining that, I mean, basically we just didn't talk for 2 weeks, and it was horrible. But God even redeemed that time. You know, when we took a wrong turn, he redeemed that. It was during that separation that we really came to know, as individuals, the love of God. We came to know more deeply what it meant to be known by him. And we were challenged to hold our relationship more lightly, to entrust one another to the Lord.
Mm-hmm. The rest of high school was a little bit of a blur of activity, so I want to jump forward to college. And since I was a year ahead of Cherri in high school, I ended up coming to college a year before she did. And that was a really challenging thing. I came here to Gordon, and it required intentional communication. And you know, when we said we were going to talk, you know, then we made an effort to talk with each other on the phone. And a willingness to be a part of her world, even though I was the one who was experiencing everything new here at Gordon. College, for us both, was really a time of identity formation. we're encountering new ideas. We're encountering new thoughts about life, about faith, about culture. And my response to that was I tended to question those things. And I tended to get pretty skeptical in response to new ideas, testing them out, which in some ways was a good response, but also it scared Cherri a little bit.
It was scary to me at times, and I think my root fear was that if I didn't understand the train of thought that his mind was going down, I was like, oh no, our roads are diverging here, and it's bye forever. And so there was that fear of letting, and difficulty letting Pete wrestle through his faith, through just all of these growing issues in his own way and in his own time. And so it was, in a sense, it was that emotional idolatry resurfacing, like me wanting to say, like, I can control this situation, like we can talk about it, and I will know what's going on, rather than saying, Lord, I entrust Pete to you, he is yours, and, work in him. It's really his holiness that matters more than our relationship. It's really you working your growth and your sanctification in me that matters more than the ultimate outcome of our relationship. So that passage from 1 John talks about walking in the light, right? Being transparent, being humble, being teachable. And I think it was really during that time that the Lord allowed our relationship to make us vulnerable enough to be teachable, to keep us in that place of transparency. And the times when we did have that genuine fellowship was really a sweet blessing. We realized that we didn't owe God anything. Just because we dated for so long didn't mean that he owed it to us to have our relationship work out according to what everyone else thought or what we expected. And yet we could trust him, and yet we could surrender to him. And he was so gracious. God was so gracious and gentle with us as he built our trust through those years.
So we've kind of been talking a little bit about the spiritual formation and emotional aspects of relationship a little bit, but I want to transition a little bit to the physical side of our relationship as well. To be perfectly honest, it was a constant struggle. It was a very real struggle. Think back to what I was saying about the contract and that physical progression. Again, it was a great thing for us then, and we're not saying, go write a contract. Everyone must write a contract. But we are saying it's important to communicate about physical standards. It's important to be on the same page. We learned rather quickly with regard to the contract that there are a lot of gray areas that can fit in between holding hands and hugging each other or something like that. But that we learn that the physical aspect of our relationship has everything to do with the attitude of our hearts. I could hold Cherri's hand and have an impure heart and an impure mind, and that's wrong. I had to check my own heart. I had to constantly ask myself, am I putting us in a compromising situation with the intent of seeing what I can get away with physically in this relationship? And to all the guys out there that are in a relationship or who will be in a relationship, that's a question we need to ask ourselves. Am I putting us in a compromising situation with the intent of seeing what I can get away with physically? There were times when I failed at this. I remember somebody speaking about sin in a Sunday school class, and something they said was, they said, if you're struggling against it, keep on struggling, for that is a sign of your salvation. That's evidence of your salvation. And so I think this can loosely be applied to relationships as well. Are you struggling with the physical side of your relationship? First, good, you're normal. Second, keep struggling. Keep struggling. And know that the grace of Christ covers you where you have failed. Like we heard in 1 John chapter 2 this morning, but if anybody does sin, we have one who speaks to the Father in our defense. His name is Jesus Christ.
That is our hope, and we were very thankful for that throughout our dating relationship. And just one example of the physical struggle. The first time that we kissed, we were in, I can't believe I'm saying this, we were in Pete's dining room.
We were doing science homework.
Chemistry.
Actually,
I think it was biology, but chemistry works better with the story. And his mom was on the phone, so we knew she was occupied. And I remember literally, I stood up and I grabbed the textbook and I threw it on the ground and I said, "This is gonna be so hard. We have so long," like just realizing, this is hard, right? And 5 years later, a few months before we were engaged, we decided, as we often did at different times, like, okay, we need to move the line backwards to protect ourselves, the physical standard line. So we were like, we're not gonna kiss until we're engaged, and then it'll be fine. And it took about 3 days of being engaged to be like, it is not fine. This is hard. So yeah, just all that to say, it's a struggle, but keep struggling. Don't give up. So finally, on July 21st, 2007, 6 years from that original car ride with Coconut the poodle, from the cottage, we got married. It was a great day, full of family, and it was an awesome day. And so I guess that brings us to what it looks like for us now.
So what does practicing everyday holiness look like for us today? Relationships provide an opportunity for sanctification. Here's what I mean. When you're in a relationship, your effect on one another, or when you're in a relationship and you are seeking holiness, your effect on one another is like sandpaper a little bit sometimes. You rub off each other's rough edges, and things are exposed. Our nastiness, our pride is exposed. When it's just me, I can hide it a little bit more easily. But relationships draw out and sometimes even provoke sin so that it can be dealt with. God wants to be a part of this sanctifying process. God wants to be in the middle of your relationship, no matter how messy it is. God wants to use others to reveal our pride, our self-serving nature, and ultimately to bring you closer to Christ.
We find this all of the time now. I mean, even as we were preparing this talk, people kept asking, "Oh, here you're speaking in chapel. How are you feeling about it? How's it going?" And we were like, "Good. It's really hard." Just trying to coalesce to thought processes, to interpretations of our own story. We found a lot of our own pride coming out. There was one point, one night late, when Pete was writing down quotes that I was saying, "I don't think there's room for both of our prides up there. We will need 2 podiums." It's just, and we just had this sense of, even as we were preparing to talk about this stuff, it was being worked out within us. We were in the act of practicing and not always responding well, So it is practice. In this theme that we're talking about this semester, practicing everyday holiness, we want to emphasize the idea of practice. We owe this image 100% to the Bowers. Those of you who know John David and Vicki Bauer, one day we were over at their place for dinner a couple of months ago and asked them for, what marital advice do you have, Bowers, now that you've been married for longer than us and have almost 5 kids? You must have wisdom. And
it's true, they do.
They do. And without skipping a beat, John David said, practice. It's all practice. It's not a performance. Marriage is not a performance. It's not presenting to the world, "Oh, we're this perfect couple." It's about pursuing holiness together, and the pressure is off. When you make a mistake, when you go 3/4 of a mile downhill the wrong direction and realize you need to turn around, it's okay. It's an opportunity to turn around and to pursue holiness together. So to conclude, this brings us back to the present, thinking about this summer, back to the trail. We did turn around. We did make it back to the trailhead. We had to learn to trust each other and to trust God in bringing us back to where we were going. We had to remember that, or as we're applying it to today, that it's just as much about our response. Holiness is just as much about our response. Because our destination in relationships isn't the relationship in the first place. Our destination is holiness. God can and will, as we invite him to, use even our wrong turns as part of our learning and growing. So thank you so much.
Thank you, guys.